Okay, we're being recorded. The attendees are in. I'll get started. Hi everyone, my name is Vanessa. I am with Canadian Women in Sport. I'm really pleased to be here on behalf of Canadian Parks and Recreation Newfoundland to be able to support with the delivery of this content today. We'll be discussing the best practices for retaining girls in sport, recreation, and physical activity, but I won't be doing most of the talking. I'm joined here by Laura Pottle in Newfoundland, who is an expert in this field and has a lot of great information that she'll be sharing in addition to the content that we have. Please, if you have any questions throughout, feel free to put them in the chat. This can be content related or tech related, and I'll be there to support you. And as always, your ideas are welcome. Feel free to have your video on, and let's have a great time. So I want to start right here and just acknowledge the land that I'm on today. As we are gathered here to share knowledge and information, it's really important that we honor the first occupants of the land. So we're fortunate enough to be gathering from many different areas as we're joining virtual. I'm going to be speaking from Toronto, where I am. And I want to acknowledge that we're meeting on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississauga of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people, and that this area is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I want to acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. And finally, that Indigenous women and girls have been underrepresented and underserved in all levels of sport in Canada, and they face unique barriers to sport participation. And at Canadian Women in Sport, it's our intention to continue to build relationships to better address those gaps through our work. This map comes from nativeland.ca. You can see the logo just at the bottom left of the page, or sorry, the URL. If you haven't heard of that website or that organization, it's a really great resource for understanding more information about the land that you're on and land across Canada or Turtle Island. So now for more information on the content we'll be discussing today and the partnership work that take place between Canadian Women in Sport and Canadian Parks and Rec Association. So Canadian Parks and Rec acknowledges that Canada's commitment to gender equity in sport by 2035, and the idea behind this work was to increase knowledge in the rec sector on how to increase retention of girls in sport and recreation, but particularly the populations listed at the bottom of the slide, so girls 9 to 15, which we dive into significantly in the content today, new mothers, women age 55 plus, and girls and women with intersecting identities. Some of the other outputs from this project include toolkits for designing spaces and programming, workshops, which take place virtually now, you're in one, a webinar or 2 annual webinars, the Scale Up with the High Five program, and then community grants. I'm not aware when the community grant for 2021 will open, but I know that it closed in December of 2020, and those successful applicants were announced in January. So feel free to pop something in the chat if we have any attendees here who were successful applicants. Lastly, I just want to speak to the framework for recreation in Canada and the topics that the content today touches on. You'll hear a lot about goal 1, 2, 4, and 5. So with goal 1, we're going to discuss how to foster active living through physical recreation. Goal 2, increasing inclusion and access to recreation for populations that face constraints to participation. Goal 4, we want to ensure the provision of supportive physical and social environments that encourage participation in recreation and build stronger caring communities. And then lastly, with Goal 5, we're going to ensure the continued growth and sustainability of the recreation field. So, oops, sorry, Laura, I just clicked on you. So by being here and having the knowledge from this workshop, that should increase capacity in the field. Last thing I'm going to do before I hand it over to Laura is just plug our website. Prior to February 2020, Canadian Women in Sport was known as CAUSE, or the Canadian Association for the Advancement of Women in Sport and Physical Activity, bit of a mouthful. With the name change also came our new website, which I think is great. You can find things way more easily than before, and there's tons of resources for program administrators, program deliverers, people reflecting on policy in their sport organizations. So whether that be gender equity in general, trans inclusion, anti-Black racism, you can find a lot of information here. Also my email address, which I'll put in the chat. But if you haven't had the chance, check out our website. And without further ado, I'll try and introduce Laura, but she wears many hats. She is an educator to children in the education system. She is also an educator through coaching, training, and yeah, I'm just going to pass it to Laura. I'm going to let you reveal to everyone all of the incredible things that you do to foster a caring community in sport and recreation in Newfoundland.
Perfect. Thank you, Vanessa. I'm honored to be here today with you to share my passion of women in sport and recreation. And I can't wait to share with you some of the information that we have for you today. So my name is Laura Pottle-Haley, and I'm actually the K-3 remote learning teacher for Newfoundland right now. I'm also a certified master coach developer for multisport. I've seen many of you around my table taking some of our coach education courses with Coaching Newfoundland. My background is in artistic swimming. I'm a master coach developer for synchronized swimming or artistic swimming. And I'm also, like Vanessa said, super passionate about women in sport, and I'm the facilitator for Women in Sport Canada. So we're going to get right into the agenda here today. So we were going to be covering a lot of material through a mix of case studies, engagement activities, and peer collaboration. So we'll be going into some breakout rooms, doing some polls, and using some Jamboard features, but it's not all of that. So you don't have to worry too much about a whole lot of group work. You can kind of sit back on this snowy day and just take in some of the information. So we're going to cover some key terms and trends that will act as a foundation of your knowledge of gender equity, both in sport, recreation, and a broader context for life. But before we jump into the X and O's of effectively and inclusively designing programs for women and girls, we're going to cover factors that influence girls to stay or leave recreational sports, and what our control is in that as program leaders, commissioners, and administrators. Lastly, we're going to build on those ideas by understanding the implementation practices that set girls up for success and lead to their continuation in recreational sport. Anytime, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. Vanessa is going to monitor that chat for content and for any questions or comments that you might have, and we'll do our best to address those questions at the appropriate time. All right. So first, we're going to tell you what's happening. We're going to give you the data, and then we're going to make it useful at the end. So it all will tie in at the end. All right, so we're going to do a renaming activity now, just really quickly to get to know one another. All right, so we'd love to know where you're from. We're going to use this all through the rename function on Zoom. So following our best practices for respect and inclusion, we're going to ask you to rename yourself with your preferred pronoun, as well as telling us either where you're from or where you're currently located. So for an example, I've got my name up here, Laura Pottle. She or her are my pronouns, and I'm actually from Mount Pearl, but I'm living in St. John's. I don't have that up there. So if you feel comfortable doing that, you can right now. All right, you can do that in two ways. You can right click on your name there in your video on the tab there, or you can see it in a drop-down menu of rename. All right, if you run into any issues, just put a message in the chat for us. I'll just give you a minute or so to do that. All right, Vanessa, does it look like people are renaming there? Are they good?
Yeah, we've got a couple people renamed, and it looks like some people still working on it.
All right, perfect. Well, you can just work on that for the next couple of seconds while I go ahead and talk about our first question that we have for you. All right, it's going to be an anonymous poll, so we want you to answer it to the best of your abilities. Question 1. I was inspired to be physically active or play sports growing up by. So number 1, family member. Number 2, a professional athlete. Number 3, a community member. Number 4, educator. Or number 5, I wasn't involved in physical activity growing up. Okay, you can see the countdown there. All right. So most of us here have family members, 67% of us have a family member, 3% have a professional athlete, which was their, the person that decided, that made them kind of go into sport, educators, and 13% of us weren't involved in physical activity growing up. All right, is this surprising to anybody? That 13% of us, I think, is interesting that 13% of us weren't involved in physical activity growing up. And I guess there could be a number of reasons for that. And I bet some of them we're going to touch on throughout the presentation. All right, so we're going to hit our workshop objectives here now. So now that we've completed the activity, we know a little bit more about each other and why we've chosen to be here today. Let's dive into the workshop objectives. So retaining girls in sport, recreation, and physical activity is a 90-minute workshop that combines foundational concepts with practical application to empower program leaders to design programs that will enhance girls' engagement and extend their participation in recreational sport. If we're successful, you will leave this experience with an understanding of the unique barriers that girls face to quality recreational sport programming, and you'll have an arsenal of tools to meet both the physical and developmental and social needs of girls in your organization. All right, so you can see the objectives there on the screen for you. All right, we're going to set the context now for the presentation. So we want to talk a little bit about equality versus equity. And I know you have probably seen this slide before. Can you switch it over for me, Vanessa? There we go. Thank you.
Sorry, I was handling a tech issue and I missed my cue. I'll be on it.
All right, you're not fired yet. All right. Okay. So we're going to talk about equality versus equity. I know you've seen this diagram likely before. You may have also seen one or different athletes or participants viewing through a fence, which I also like as well, but it's the same kind of diagram. Equity and equality are very common terms, but they're often mistaken as interchangeable. In essence, they're very similar, but it's very important to understand the difference. As an organization with a mission of advancing gender equality and equity, Canadian women and sport often are clarifying the difference between these two terms. So looking at this bicycle metaphor on the slide, equality focuses on creating the same starting line for everyone by offering each person what is perceived as the same opportunity with the same piece of equipment. And on the right, you see that equity focuses on providing everyone with a full range of opportunities and different bikes so that everyone can achieve similar outcomes or reach the same finish line. And in this difference, equity acknowledges and encourages us to address that many contributing factors that may impact our starting line. It's so important when we're talking about developing recreational programs for girls. Gender equity is a process of allocating resources, programs, and decision-making fairly to both men and women, and addressing any imbalances in the benefits available to men and women, boys and girls, and people of diverse genders. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about intersectionality. And this is a relatively new term that people are less familiar with. So we've chosen to include a complete definition of the term on the slide. So intersectionality is the interconnected nature of social categorizations that apply to an individual, creating overlapping and independent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. And you can zoom it in there if you need to, and see all the different parts of intersectionality. And in practice, intersectionality considers the layers of individual identity and how together those layers impact how people move through the world. And in the following section, you're going to see how factors of someone's identity correlate to their likelihood of them staying in or joining recreational sport at all. Intersectionality is a necessary tool to apply when designing and planning programs to all levels to ensure safety, inclusion, representation, equal opportunity, etc. And Canadian Women in Sport is in the final stages of developing a handbook that gives tangible tips to create more inclusive sport and recreation environment for newcomer girls and women, which includes appropriate staffing and environments, offering choices and programs, accessible facilities and scheduling, etc.
I'm going to jump in quickly because Matt made mention that document will be finalized in the upcoming weeks, but it is going to be shared this week. So you'll receive a link to that in the follow-up email. For those who are asking if the slides will be sent out, they won't, but you're going to receive a recording of the workshop. And then lastly, just another point on intersectionality is that this is a term that was developed by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is an activist in the United States. And she, when the term was founded, or she developed it in a report, it was an analysis in the intersection between women and people of color and how the judicial system fails them. So that's the roots of the term, and it was developed in the late 70s or early 80s, but just to provide a little bit more context. Not a term by any means that Canadian Women in Sport developed.
Perfect, thank you, Vanessa. We'll move on from intersectionality now, and we'll go to our long-term development model. So this is definitely not something new to any of us here in recreation, but the long-term development model, many of you may be well versed in this. We're going to take a little look. It's the 3.0 version, and it's a valuable resource that considers the Canadian sport experience across lifespan from cradle to grave. And you can see that the long-term development model now has strategies for gender neutral versus consideration based on socialized differences. So I think, Vanessa, were you going to make that available as well? Did you say in the chat?
Yes, 3.0 came out, I believe, at the end of last year, and I will put a link to that in the chat now. Thanks.
Okay. And this 3.0 module, I love because it touches on some of the barriers that girls and young women in sport physical activity experience. So it's definitely something that as program developers for recreation will want to be well versed in for sure. All right. We're going to have another poll now on the current Canadian landscape. So using.
So this one, oh yeah, go for it.
No, you go.
So this one we're going to use through Annotate. So for anyone who's unfamiliar with Annotate, if you hover your cursor at the top of the screen, you should see a gray button that says View Options. When you click that, there's a drop down and you can select Annotate. A new menu will appear on your screen and you have the option to do markers or stamps or any of the little drawing features. Using your best guess, make some sort of a mark in the quadrant that you believe is the right answer. So when looking at what percentage of Canadian girls are not participating in any kind of sport or physical activity.
All right, we've got about 5 seconds left. You can make your mark. All right, it looks like right now we're pretty close between 51% and 62%. All right, maybe another second or so. I still see some people drawing. All right, Allison, get your mark in. All right, so we've got still some people going. All right, so unfortunately, the answer to this question is 51%. All right, which is pretty astonishing. The fact that these 51% of Canadian girls are not participating in any type of sport or physical activity recreation program. All right, so the data from this table are from the Canadian Women and Sport Rally Report. The Rally Report explores current Canadian trends in sport participation with a specific focus on the target group of girls aged 6 to 18. Overall, the Rally Report data shows that sport participation levels for Canadian girls are much lower than boys. Among girls who have participated in any sport or recreation, there is a dramatic dropout rate observed, with 1 in 3 girls leaving sport by late adolescence. By comparison, the dropout rate for teenage boys aged 16 to 18 is only 1 in 10. And sport participation rates for Canadian girls decline steadily from childhood to adolescence, with as many as 62% of girls not playing any sports at all. However, if that girl had a disability or her family earns less than $50,000 annually, the odds are even greater. So this table shows us why we have to consider more than program execution when looking to extend girls' time in sport, recreation, physical activity. While not all of these factors are within our sphere of influence as program leaders or sport administrators, we have to think of what barriers that we can lessen, if not eliminate. So keep thinking about that question as we go through. Are we doing well in the chat there, Vanessa, before we move on to our next activity?
Yeah, a lot of resources in there, and nobody's run into any issues with the Annotate, so we're crushing it.
Perfect. All right, so our next little activity is, again, using the poll function that we just used before. What percentage of girls report that the quality of program was a barrier to their participation? So the actual quality of the programming. Give you 15 to 20 seconds to complete this poll. We should be familiar with it now. So we've got 15%, 28%, 33%, or 43%.
And you make a great point with the last slide and evaluating those other factors that contribute to whether a girl will be able to participate in sport. And it's really important that we have the participants leave today recognizing that, you know, girls are not a homogenous group. And although we get to show this national data and it's a great temperature check for how we're doing, big picture for girls' participation in sport. There's really a lot more to the story and a lot more nuance to that data, and we can't approach the group like they are homogenous and every girl's experience is identical.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Vanessa. So thank you everyone for participating again. It looks like we have mostly people said 28% in our group. And then I guess tied there with 43%. The correct answer, unfortunately, is 43%. So 43% of girls report that the quality of the programming is actually one of the barriers to them participating. So as you can see, nearly half of the girls surveyed said that program quality was a barrier, all right, to participating and their continuation in sports. On the slide, you can see the various reasons that the quality of a program can be diminished. And fortunately, these reasons are within our control. So that's, I think, what's so promising here is that we can control every single one of these things here as recreation directors or commissioners. So survey responses here, the sport is not appropriately designed for girls. The quality coaching is needed. Not enough positive role models are available. Poor overall experiences, or that sport might be too competitive. And every one of these things we can fix. Obviously, it's not going to be an easy fix. It's definitely not even something that is a short-term fix, but in the long run, with some of the tips that we're going to provide you today, we hope that we'll be able to help raise the retention of girls in your recreation programs. All right, so we're going to continue our discussion on what factors impact girls' participation in sport, recreation, and physical activity. All right, so we're going to continue now with something that I'm sure you've seen before, our socio-ecological model. So as we know, girls experience barriers to sport on a number of different junctures. A socio-ecological model is a helpful way to look at the various layers of influence. It includes 4 spheres. So it's interpersonal, intrapersonal, environmental, and political or societal. So we're going to look at the interpersonal sphere, and that considers anything that a girl may think that prevents her from participating in sport. So this could result from any internalized stereotypes, like believing a specific sport is too rough for girls, or she'll be perceived to have a specific sexual preference if she likes sports, or if she doesn't want to be seen as disruptive by pointing out a barrier to her participation in sport. And I bet these are all things that we hear quite frequently, these interpersonal conflicts that girls possess. If we look at the intrapersonal sphere, which considers close relationships that affect a girl's understanding of the role in sport in her life, like does she have an emotional or economic support of her family to participate in sport? And then our environment sphere, that considers the different access points to sport, literally and figuratively. Are these programs available to her? Are they of high quality? Are there other girls in the program? Are there appropriate cultural measures in place for a Muslim girl, for example? And is there any addition to the right equipment? Are the role models present in the coaching staff and other program administrators? So these are all definitely things that we would hear here in Newfoundland as well. And lastly, we have the policy related sphere, and that considers the external structures that affect a community's access to quality sport programming. Is the program adequately funded? Is the program held at a time that girls can attend? And are there streams for girls to progress as athletes? So with these different spheres in mind, we can imagine that while one girl might have the support of her or their family, which would be like the interpersonal factors, to be physically active, they may run into other barriers, such as the school not offering a program that they loved, which would be the environmental or a policy related factor. And there's lots of other different examples, I bet, that we can think about, when it comes to our socio-ecological model that would affect girls' retention in sport. So as advocates for girls' participation in sport and physical activity and recreation, we must continually ask ourselves, what barrier exists to the programs that you offer, and what barriers can you mitigate? So as we're going through today and as you leave us today, we'd love for you to really have a little look at that model, the socio-ecological model, and see what factors come into play with your organization. And we also have to remember intersectionality, and that with this model, not everybody's experience is the same. Did you have anything to add to that, Vanessa, before we move on?
Nope, you covered it. And for me, it's always a great reminder, you know, it's knowledge that I'm like, oh, I know about this, but hearing it time and time again and reevaluating things through that lens is really important.
Perfect. All right, so we have another chat storm coming up. Did you want to explain where they will do this one, Vanessa, in the Jamboard?
Yeah, so we are not going to do a Jamboard. We're going to do a chat storm. So I'll ask that everybody answers question 1 by putting your response in the chat. So we'd love to hear from you what you believe the top reasons girls give for leaving sport and recreation. So what have you experienced in the sector? What is, you know, one of the challenges that you lose girls out to? And if you could put a few in the chat, you could put 1, but we'd love to hear from you and get a better understanding of your circumstance. Once we read a few of those out, we'll move on to the top reasons you believe girls give for staying in sport and recreation. All right, I'm already seeing a couple of answers in here. This is great. We're gonna make it like a storm, everybody putting it in at the same time, and you'll have about, let's say, 30 seconds. These are really great. I'm actually going to read some as they come in so I don't lose sight of them. Barriers to transportation and family support, lack of safety, and Jen gave the example of road safety for cycling, the cost, other interests or friends leaving sport and girls wanting to follow suit, a lack of friends, lack of opportunity. There are no other girls in the program. That can be an incredibly intimidating situation, especially if there's already relationships formed with the other participants. So peer influence, friends leaving, being the only girl, not a lack of interest, not enough girls participating for a quality program, lack of opportunity, this is recreational or competitive, having other responsibilities, that's huge, especially for that age group. Having to play with boys, poor practice times and game times, so having that conflict in their schedule. Nowhere to progress, grow, or excel, that is a big one. Bullying and negative dynamics. Too constructed, not fun, not social, no friends participating, too much pressure to compete. Those are all great responses. No family support, huge. Okay, there are tons of really good ones in here. Wow, I can't believe how long this goes on for. I'm going to move it over to the top reasons girls give for staying in sport. So what do you believe the reasons that attract girls to sport and recreation, and what keeps people playing? So if you want to flood the chat there. Sense of community, social aspects, the love of sport, encouragement from parents, great coaching, passion, their friends participate, community, sense of belonging, friends, physical activity, the program is fun, the enjoyment of competition, healthy competition, feeling supported, friendships developing, having fun, feeling strong, the impact of a good role model, huge. Enjoyment of playing, good coaching, mental well-being, opportunity to meet people, positive impact, self-satisfaction, goal setting. Yep. learning new skills, mentorship, enjoyment of physical activity, travel opportunities, the feeling of accomplishment. Solid. Those are all great.
Yep. Excellent. And I knew, Vanessa, that everybody would have an easy time doing this for sure. All right, so thank you so much for your contributions. And as a group, you came up with so many barriers as well as enhancers. And I particularly love looking at the enhancers for sure. It just makes you think that, you know, there is a light at the end of the tunnel for sure. And for this reason, we're going to address the top 4 factors that lead girls in Canada to leave sport, and then the top 3 that keep them in sport according to the 2020 Rally Report. So these are time commitments, or rather competing commitments such as school, part-time work, taking care of siblings, or older family, etc. I went way too fast, Vanessa, I'm sorry. All right. Yeah, so we have time commitment, financial barriers. You know, a lot of girls have to deal with taking care of siblings or other family members, injuries as well. All right, and then we have sport or physical activity no longer being enjoyable. All right, and some people did allude to that in the chat as well. All right, so we're going to go over to the enhance side. So we have a positive learning dynamics, trying hard, and positive coaching. And a lot of you said good coach role models, which was amazing. So girls identify that having fun as a group, competing and working hard, and positive coaching are the highlights of their sport experience, and it keeps them coming back for more. So in the next section, we're going to cover how you as program leaders and sport and recreation administrators can address these barriers and have a positive impact on the girls in your community. So here we go with the meat of the course. What can we do? All right, so we want to design, we know that why girls leave sport, which are the barriers, and what motivates them to play and stay, which are the benefits. Now we'll look at some evidence-based solutions that you can apply to support ongoing participation and retention in your programs. So we've narrowed them down to 4. So number 1 being consult. Number 2, build supportive environments. Number 3, foster fun. And 4, prevent injuries. So we're going to go down through each of these in detail. So the first one is consult. So as mentioned, consultation is key to offering programs that are appropriate and will benefit your community. This can mean offering programs that girls are interested in, understanding why participation rates are dropping, or finding out how to layer in specific education into sport, recreation, or physical activity. Effective consultation requires thoughtful research and in most cases partnerships. So when you're improving or developing new programs, the groups that you consult should be stakeholders of your programs and that have a breadth of experience with your target audience. For example, if we're looking as our objective to engage more newcomers or girls or women, we want to consider contacting local agencies such as the Association for New Canadians, and in most high schools across the province, there are learn programs where you could talk to the ESL teachers, to have a more specific consultation. We also want to talk about diversity. We want to ensure that there's diversity in the groups that we consult. So are you surveying prospective program participants from different socioeconomic groups? And are you surveying prospective program participants of all abilities? And remember to keep in mind the intersecting identities of those that you're planning for, and ensure you consult a representative group. All right.
Oh,
so yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
I was going to jump to the staff component because I remembered like a pretty significant memory last week about when I first started coaching. And I coach basketball. I started on the high performance side and I moved to a sport for development facility in Toronto. And we offer free programming and we fold in life skills to achieve a number of things, but keeping kids in school, keeping kids physically active, getting them ready for work, etc. And I was asked, how did the program go? And I said, it was great. We ended on time. They worked really hard. There weren't any behavioral issues. And one of my supervisors asked if they had fun. And I said yes. And then they asked, how do you know? And I was like, they were running around, they were laughing, and there were no issues of bullying or anything like that. But ultimately, I was just observing, and I didn't have it in my practice to ask the kids, are you having a good time? Are there any games that you want to play? I was new, and so I was scheduling my program. So it's like, this happens, this happens, this happens. And I didn't give them any opportunity to contribute. And choice is a really big component to girls' participation and satisfaction in sport programming and other types of engagement. And that was a huge learning for me. And I think consult is a really official term, but it doesn't have to be like complete this anonymous survey so that we can get data and implement X, Y, or Z. It can be conversations and building relationships with your community, which I know is challenging to talk about right now, given the public health sanctions in place across the country. But that's just something I wanted to share because I've been reflecting on it over the weekend.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing. All right, so consulting your staff, your community, your participants, and other organizations. So have a chat with the girls that are in your groups and ask them what they want, what they're looking for in sports. It doesn't have to be, adults or officials. It could be the actual participants, because that's who we definitely want to retain. So we have to think kind of outside the box a little bit too. All right, so the second way that we're going to think about designing our programs is through building supportive environments. So we want a safe environment for girls. When considering girls' key motivations to participation, creating a social and emotionally safe space for your participants and staff must be a priority. A safe environment is not limited to the physical space and emergency procedures. The three factors, the physical environment, the social environment, and the physical and mental environment, are interrelated. All three pieces have a relationship with one another, and without consideration for one of those aspects, you cannot achieve a safe and supportive program environment. So let's see what this actually looks like. All right, so understanding your participation's motivations to be in programs is key to fueling their desire to play, and it's key to retaining them in your program. So as you can see here, there's key distinction between what leads to positive outcomes for girls and boys. So for many boy participants, performance enhances their social position. And for girl participants, social acceptance enhances individual and group performance. So they ask themselves the question, am I accepted and valued for who I am? So when she feels accepted, she has security to try without fear of any social repercussions for making mistakes or failing. Effort that leads to improved performance, which fuels even more effort. But we can't forget the root of social connections. This is why managing group dynamics and cohesion is so important for all teams. So you can just take a look there at this little chart about what girls want. They want social acceptance, they want effort, performance, and then that leads to positive sport experience. Whereas in boys, it's effort, performance, and social acceptance. All right, another way that we can build a supportive environment is to go beyond the X's and O's of the program. So we define such environments as being welcoming, emphasizing the value of safe sport, prioritizing social connections, exposing girls and women, exposing girls to women role models, and lead to the empowerment of girls in and outside sport. It's so important to acknowledge that in the same way a girl's sport and physical activity experience can be greatly influenced by factors at the different socio-ecological levels in her life, everyone has a role to play in ensuring an environment is supportive. So That's everybody involved in the program, the organizational leads, the recreation administrators, the program delivers. Everybody has a role to play to make the environment safe and welcoming and encouraging. So I'd love for you now just to take a moment to reflect on your staff and on your team culture. Does it meet these standards? Does it meet the standards of being safe and welcoming? Is it encouraging girls to value and stay in sports? Does it provide a positive experience and a lasting social connection? Does it expose girls to strong and powerful role models? And does it empower girls to strive for their full and equal position in sport and society? And perhaps, you do 3 or 4 of these bullet points very well in your recreation activities. And maybe there's 1 or 2 that you really think you need to work on. So jot those down and bring them back, to your program administrators so you can build those supportive environments. And another way that we can build a supportive environment is to recognize that it can't exist without role models. So supportive environments cannot exist without a visible role model and champions of gender equity. To reap the full benefits of role models, they must consciously practice healthy habits and adopt positive attitudes that participants can learn from. Representation is necessary, so all girls have a role model they can look up to, and we can take a look at how to include and leverage role models to create a safe and empowering environment. And there's lots of more suggestions like this that we can find in the She Belongs, Building Social Connections for Lasting Participants in Sport. And do you have that to go in the chat as well, Vanessa?
Yes, I shared that one a couple slides ago, so that's time-stamped at 12:16. And attendees, feel free to put a stamp on the slide next to the bullet point that you're most keen to try, you've done before, and you endorse or otherwise.
We'll just give you a second to do that. When I read this slide, it reminds me of the cycling team that's going now to Canada Games, Vanessa. They've never taken a full contingent with the cycling team, and now this year they have a women's coach, and she is, trying to get as many people involved as she can. And girls are seeing that she is a girl coach, a woman coach, and they're interested now in joining the team. So they believe that they're actually going to take a full contingency, which would be really amazing for our province and the sport of cycling. So I just love to hear stories like that. That's huge. Yeah,
that's really huge.
Yeah.
For me and my sport experience, I remember because I grew up in Ottawa, and we have University of Ottawa and Carleton University, which both have like pretty prolific basketball programs on the men's and women's side. And we had plays that were named like Raven or Gigi, or we understood that, this defense was reflective of the Gigi's full court pressure. And it really, most of the players would then go to a game Friday night or Saturday night. That's when they played, and it ingrained a culture and also gave you something to look forward to or aspire to be. And I think it's something that a lot of people could incorporate more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also see my own children are involved. My younger children are involved in recreational ball hockey, and most of the coaches there are women. And it is so great that my little girl, who's the only girl in the program, can go, well, the coaches are girls, so I can play, because she was a little bit nervous at first to play where she was the only girl. So it's so important that these role models are available. All right, so looking at your stamps over here, we have a lot of people that are inviting women coaching and mentors and community leaders in. So that's really great. And then some are doing what you did, Vanessa, with referencing a name of the drill after an athlete or a team. That's neat as well.
I think as well, with a lot of things placed on hold, high performance especially, there could be a lot of opportunities of women in your community who are available to step into that role model role more fulsomely. But you just need to make that initial connection and email them. And I know a lot of people are willing to do that if given the opportunity. So if it isn't something that you're currently doing, I would encourage you to seek out those opportunities.
Right. And people are probably not going to approach you, right? But also you have to remember that, it's important to ask women. We're not too busy, we can make time, and especially if it's for sport or recreational activity that we have participated in the past, we want to give back. So it's so important just to take that chance and just ask. All right. So the next way or key design consideration that we're going to talk about is fostering fun. And you had alluded to this earlier, Vanessa, with your program example. So we need to talk about fun and how girls define fun. So when surveyed, girls noted positive team dynamics, getting to put in effort and trying hard at something, and positive coaching as the big three indicators of a fun experience. So take a second to think about what that looks like in your practice. Okay, fun is different for girls than it is for boys, that's for sure. Right, they're there mostly because of the other people that are in the sport as well, and they want to try hard, of course. All right, and we'll talk just briefly now about positive team dynamics. How do you develop that cohesion on a team? And why is it critical to build positive dynamics on a team? So we need to think about ways that girls just want to feel emotional security. They want a social, supportive learning environment. They want opportunities to develop and build healthy relationships. They want to feel confident in skills to attempt a new activity. So in order to do that, we have to figure out why it's critical to build positive dynamics on a team. So we want to enhance girls' performance. We want to address the social pressures that lead girls to drop out of sport at twice the rate of boys. We want to prepare coaches to recognize and disrupt the signs of girls' disengagement from recreation and sport. And there are so many ways to infuse social connections into your sport program. We recommend adding unstructured time and offering informal activities that are participant driven. So this could look like allowing participants to warm up to their favorite music, giving them free time to work on a skill of their choosing. And this allows for girls to collaborate and for you as a leader to learn more about their likes and dislikes. We also suggest planning activities like shout outs, which give girls the opportunity to lift each other up and develop closer relationships. And to be truly effective, however, these values must be part of a greater organizational attitude to prioritize relationships over outcomes, and they are a need. All right, and another factor in the key design considerations in fostering fun is trying hard. So like most people, girls find satisfaction in giving their best effort. Referring back to those intrinsic motivators, this does require that a program leader first creates an environment where girls feel comfortable to show vulnerability by trying hard. So what can get in the way of trying new things? Learning from experiences and getting to compete is the potential of making a mistake and jeopardizing that social standing. So to combat this, girls must have the fundamentals down so that they can build more complex skills on top of that foundation. We also encourage the use of goal setting to enable girls to reframe risk-taking as a necessary means of improvement. Let them know that mistakes are okay and a necessary part of learning, and we have to celebrate mistakes. So girls just want to participate in quality sport programming. They just want to learn new skills. They want to improve through intentional skill building, and they just want to compete. So in order to do this, it's so important as recreational leaders that we ensure competency in the fundamental movement skills. We ensure that they lead activities that are developmentally appropriate and an environment that encourages risk-taking and set goals. All right, and also not to forget about positive coaching. Contrary to popular belief, positive coaching is not criticism or competition avoidance. Coaches show that they care about participants by listening to them and coaching with patience and encouragement. So positive coaches also empower their teams by making them feel like they belong. They prioritize social connections within the group, and they lead by example. All right, and the last key design consideration for your program is to prevent injury. So lastly, we discuss injury prevention, and girls and young women are at a greater risk of experiencing certain injuries when being physically active. So having a knowledge of these injuries and what causes them will allow you to be better prepared against them. So depending on the nature of the injury, some may require you to educate both your participants and the parents. The Keeping Girls in Sport e-module is full of valuable information on this topic, and a link to that resource is going to be shared now. Okay, perfect. All right, so there are 3 different types of injuries, and there are preventative measures that you can ensure that girls have a safe sport experience. So for the mechanical injuries, you want to teach the fundamental movement skills, which will allow girls to have the foundation and the strength to learn more complex movements and skills, which minimize the risk of injury. Education with both participants, parents, and guardians about energetic injuries is a great preventative measure. You can reinforce this by discussing how fuel and good food choices are able to help you to perform and stay active. And lastly, let your team know what to look out for in terms of social isolation and take proactive steps to maintain a positive group dynamic to help that psychosocial injury. All right, was there anything in the chat there that we needed to have a look at? I saw a few things pop up, or is that you just adding in the?
It's just me. But everybody feel free to, if you have any questions or comments on what was shared, feel free to put those in the chat. We now are able to move on to our scenario component. So I'm going to be able to set up the breakout rooms. I'm going to put the prompts in the chat. But Laura, if you could speak to the scenario that's on screen, that would be great.
Yep. All righty. So you want to think of yourself, obviously, as a program leader. Toward the end of your last program cycle, you notice the attendance of the girls in your co-ed recreational program, which is multi-sport, the attendance drastically decreased. When you're asked one of your participants why fewer girls were attending, she explained that the boys don't pass and a number of the girls were bullying each other at school. So the majority of girls register again for the upcoming program cycle, but how do you plan for the next program cycle knowing this information? All right, and this is definitely something that you have heard before in a multi-sport situation or a multi-recreational program. All right. So what's the underlying, oh, go ahead, yeah.
Oh no, the prompts are there and you can discuss the prompts and I will, the breakout rooms are nearly done.
Perfect. How long will they have now in the breakout room, Vanessa?
6 to 8 minutes.
Perfect. And can you have somebody that might want to share the information with us, please, in your group? You can nominate somebody. All right.
All right, the breakout rooms are good to go. You will have to, I know that we have some people on different devices who are maybe not available to participate in the breakout rooms. So I've made it that you have to accept entering the breakout room. So just please ensure to do that once it pops up on your screen. If you run into any issues, please send me a message. Once you're in the breakout room, you'll have the opportunity to notify Laura and I as the hosts that you need support and to come in. And there'll also be a countdown at the top. So you have 7 minutes to discuss the prompts that are in the chat. And again, if you run into any issue, reach out. All right, see you in 7 minutes.
Love to hear what your groups came up with. I wonder, is there somebody who'd like to start to share your group's findings on this scenario?
I can start.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Jen.
So we had a little group of 4, and we were from Ottawa to Labrador to Newfoundland, and we talked about consulting with the participants in the program, so the girls and the boys, to see what's up, what's going on for them from all of their perspectives, with both the bullying and also the sports-like or unsports-like activities that are happening. We also talked about, looking forward, how would we kind of re-enter back into the program in the fall when they come back, using that information. And I think we agreed that, looking at if there's an existing code of conduct, using the information that we glean from the consultations about expectations, what are people's expectations about participation, and also making sure that everyone's clear in that first week and what their responsibility is for that. And we also think, checking back in after a few weeks to see how things are going and how people are feeling about it again is important for following up.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing. Is there another group that wanted to share?
I'll go ahead. Our group basically said the same thing that Jan said. We did talk about the boys not passing. That was an issue, and how we can, we wanted to have that consultation as well with all the players to say, what was happening and have that open discussion. More drills to include interacting with each other. We talked about code of conduct as well, and discussions on why I guess they were getting along as they were. Yeah, it was important for us to consult and ask what it was, ask the team in general what was happening.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Nice to see you again, by the way.
Good to see you too, Laura.
Is there another group that wanted to share?
I'll
Do you
share.
feel comfortable? Okay, great.
We talked about an idea to address the lack of passing from the boys. I find it helps if you explain the purpose of the activity, like explain like scoring is not the function. Usually when someone hogs the ball, it's because they view themselves as superior. And if I pass, we're going to lose type of thing. Like it's a teamwork drill. The idea is to focus on passing. I don't really care about how much you score. And you have to pass at least 3 times before you score and to make sure at least one of those are girls. You can modify games to really focus on passing.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing with us, Simone, and your group. Is there another group that'd like to share?
I could share. Oh,
okay.
Oh, no, you go ahead.
All right, Candace.
Thanks. So we were a group, myself and Stuart, Heather and Rihanna and Mark.
And we discussed the underlying issue being more about the girls bullying each other on the outside rather than the issue of the boys not passing on the inside. So we thought the important thing would be address what's going on outside before, and then that would ultimately resolve what was going on the inside. So we thought that we would definitely consult with the coach, teachers and administrators, but most specifically the girls who are on the team as a group, taking them together outside of the full group. And to address things, and for the, before the next program cycle, we would want to incorporate more team building exercises with the whole group, and also with the girls just as a separate group, to work on building their confidence, their self-esteem, and their just respect among each other as a group of girls. And I think that would help for them to have more confidence on the court and approaching the boys in more of a, I'm going to pick up that pass, and kind of being more confident to do that. We also talked about creating a program where all participants are on a level playing field, so that there's nobody who's already innately better at the particular exercise. For example, Stuart had come up with this really good example, and I'll ask him to share.
So just very quickly, the example that I threw out was my sport is volleyball. So if you got a group of guys and girls, guys tend to be able to jump higher, hit harder. One way to put everybody on equal footing is to say play sitting volleyball, which then puts everybody on a much more equal basis. So suddenly the physical attributes of the guys aren't as dominant. So it's just changing it just a little bit. So you're still doing very much a similar activity, but allows for a little bit more equality all the way through.
That's great. Thank you for sharing, Stuart and Candace. Thank you. Is there another group that wanted to share?
I can go.
Okay, Amy.
So we kind of pretty much did the same thing as Candace. We were kind of focusing that the bullying was kind of an issue too, that was trickling into from the school aspect. So we chatted about reaching out to the school, the teachers, to see what was happening at school that would trickle over. But then that kind of turned into a conversation of other things kind of trickle into that as well. So I use an example of a hockey league. Say if you play on a competitive hockey league and now you're jumping into a recreation league as well, we find that the elite kind of people kind of can tend to like take over, and that doesn't even matter if it's girls or boys. It's one kind of group, might be two kids who are just passing constantly back and forth, and then overpowering. So how do you get back to, this is not the competitive side here, and knowing, I guess, that everyone's knowledge and skill base is a little different, and how do you get everyone on the same playing field?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Are there any other contributions that you'd like to make before we move along?
Just a quick one. Thanks to my group for helping me out with this one. Brenton here. We kind of thought that since the boys weren't passing, and then that may have been a factor to some of the bullying, and now that's kind of gotten back into their school day. So we kind of figured that there might be a domino kind of effect there. When we're talking, we would talk with the girls who were getting bullied. One of my group members said that they might be able to give staff some more background to the story that we may not see. Trying to plan for the next cycle, one of the things that we found kind of interesting is that that most of the people that had signed up for the first program, they signed up for the second program too. So perhaps ahead of that, we could do a session on fair play, bullying. I do notice that a lot of coaching courses and stuff, they kind of have that in there now. So maybe there's something that we could work with there. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that was a really good point too, Brent. Thank you and your group that, yes, most of them, the majority of girls did re-register, right? So there must be something in your program that is pulling people in. All right, great. Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to move on now to our reflection. All right, so this is the end of the course here now. We can see on this slide some of the key actions that you're now able to take in order to advance the sport and physical activity sector into a more equitable and inclusive space. So these actions include identifying the subtle and unsubtle barriers that exist for girls in sport and physical activity, recognizing society's role in this and the way we unconsciously perpetuate those ideas, advocate for equity, and take steps to keep girls in sport and be intentional. All right. Vanessa?
Yep, so over here is the QR code for the post-workshop evaluation, but I've also posted the link in the chat. We really value your feedback and also your participation in this workshop. So if you could take a moment to fill out the survey, it's pretty brief. I'll be able to share a link to it in the follow-up email as well. But if you have the opportunity, it'd be really great to get your thoughts and your experience in the survey, so that we can continue to work with this content and make it the most relevant it can be to those that we're sharing it with. So we'd really appreciate if you could get to that when possible. And then I'd really like to thank Canadian Parks and Rec Association. I want to thank Recreation NL, Recreation Newfoundland, and the Government of Canada, who supported with the funding of this program. And finally, big thank you to Laura for being our guide today, adding a lot of the color commentary relevant to Newfoundland and sharing her experience. I really appreciate it, and I know everybody got a lot out of it today. And we have the opportunity now to dive into some of those questions. We have a healthy chunk of time. So if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask Laura or myself, or you can pop those in the chat.
Thank you very much, everybody.
I've got a question, Laura, and I don't know if the studies reflect this. Is there any correlation to females' lack of participation in sport or dropping out of sport and the level of male coaches directly involved in a sport?
So I can speak to that, and it's a fairly specific question. There isn't data that that evaluates girls' participation through that lens, and if they're, but I do know, and Laura gave a great example, that with the cycling team in Newfoundland, having a woman as a coach and the increased participation on that team. So I know that having women as role models does increase girls' participation. That doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be the head coach, although it is a pretty powerful tool. But really the lens that they bring to their experience in that role contributes to the participation. So I would say if there are some men in coaching that, consulting with a woman in the sport would be beneficial. To increase that participation. I might have gotten off a little bit there, but there isn't any data that directly correlates right now that's available.
Thank you. And somebody, just a very quick follow-up on that. Have you looked at doing a similar presentation on retaining women in coaching as well? Because I know for our sport, one of the biggest issues we have is we have a lot of female participation, but very few of them move on to high level coaching. So finding strong female role model coaches is a real challenge for us. And I'm just wondering if there's anything in the works of this nature for perhaps something along those lines as well.
That's a really excellent question. So we don't have a workshop like this, but we do offer Canadian Women in Sport in terms of services. That's something that we work more directly with organizations. So we might be working with the national sport organization. Like I'll continue with this example. If Cycling Canada or Cycling Newfoundland, if those are the names of those bodies, and then the national sport organization and the provincial sport organization, to review their policy to ensure that there's nothing in there that actually hinders women's ability to attain high-level coaching certifications, for example. And we offer other services like our WISE Fund, which bringing in women coaches and getting them to that certification so they can move on to high performance or whatever that may be, is another avenue where we support in that way. We don't present the information like this because the audience is a little bit different, but I think that is a really great idea and a way to. I personally have a friend who is doing her PhD in Ottawa, University of Ottawa, about evaluating pathways. So when women leave high performance sport, like what is their trajectory as coaches, officials, sport administrators? But having it as a workshop like this can be really interesting. So thank you for mentioning that. I know one more thing I'll add to it is when we do work with sport organizations, a lot of the times the data is a little bit skewed. So they'll, say that we have 50%, we're 50-50, we have gender parity. Our coaching staff at all levels, there's 50% women, 50% men. But if you distill that a little bit, you see that, from ages 6 to 12, the majority of the coaches are women. And then when you get into the high performance or higher level, they're 13 plus. It's predominantly men. And then girls reach that 13 years old and they don't see women in the leadership positions. And then that's when things start to derail. So again, I don't think I quite answered your question. I'm intrigued by the idea of having like those pathways through a workshop, but right now that work has more been being done with through direct consultation and through the review of policies and allocation of resources to be able to grow women in sporting and coaching.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I see there's some more questions in the chat. Oh, this is great. So Michelle shared, and hopefully you're still on the call, but she wanted to add a note that when trying to create supportive environments, pay particular attention to social media and policies. How are you presenting yourself? So being a good role model in social media, I think that's super important. Laura, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's the first thing that people go to, isn't it? Is social media. Like when we're hiring coaches or when we're talking about, recreationist participants, people go to their social media page. So it's so important to represent yourself properly. Michelle, I think that's a really great tip. Not only yourself, but your organization as well, right? Yeah. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that, Michelle?
If you can hear me okay?
Yeah, you're a little bit low, but I got my Whisper 3000 on, so we're good.
All right. No, I just wanted to say a friend of mine was, she's Indigenous, and I remember her saying to me one day that she had gone in looking for information on a particular sport, and she had saw an inclusion policy, which included actual wording, and she said how that really affected her and made her feel, and it was just that little thing that just made her in particular feel inclusive. So it's important to pay attention to those types of things. I'm not from a coaching background or a sporting background. I'm from the policy side. And so I'm here kind of learning from you all and kind of seeing this. So this is particularly important for us, is that it all comes down to the policy and what you set out as the tone for your intention.
Yep. I think
That's
it's a
all I
great point. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that when I first started out coaching, it was through summer camps, and there were all these policies, and it was like, you cannot be friends with, and you know, it was more to like Facebook and maybe Instagram was new, but like, you can't be friends with any of your athletes. Like, you can't have any contact with them on social media just because of all the liabilities. And when I moved on to another organization that was a little bit newer and didn't have policies in place, I learned from other coaches, because I was like, oh, you know, so-and-so added me, like, definitely can't do that. And they actually did. They were friends with some of the athletes because they recognized that, you know, kids are dealing with a lot and they want, you know, a way to form connections. And that might be like having you on Facebook and sending you a Facebook message might be one of the easiest ways for them to reach out for support. And so it kind of opened my eyes to, you know, that depending on your specific situation, it might be appropriate. You just have to figure out, you know, what the boundaries are. So that's something that has definitely been a thought for me, and thing that I thought one thing and now I think something else, and social media is always changing, and I might think something else in a couple of months' time, but especially now because we're socially distanced, I think you know, maintain your own boundaries and make sure that you're being safe. But you know, you have to meet kids where they're at, and offer support in a way that's actually accessible to them. And maybe being friends over social media or having a separate account for that is the right way to go about it. Yeah, thanks for sharing, Michelle. We have 1 minute left. I've really enjoyed hearing from everybody, and teasing out some of these really insightful questions. As mentioned, if you could complete the feedback survey when it's convenient to you, that'd be fantastic. This session has been recorded, and that will be shared with you in a follow-up email, as well as links to the resources shared throughout. And once again, I want to give a really big thank you to Laura. Thanks for being with us today and sharing all of your valuable insights. And yeah, another big thank you for everyone who made it out. I understand there's a lot of snow where you are, so appreciate your participation.
Thank you, everybody, and hope to see you again really soon.
All right, stay safe.